Hey, let's talk about the Jews. The book that we know of as Galatians is a letter, also known as an epistle, that was written by Paul to a church that is located in what we today would call the center of Turkey. It's a region that was called Galatia, hence the name Galatians. The church in Galatia was struggling with this interesting paradigm that's something that on the one hand seems very foreign to us today, but on the other hand actually has some interesting parallels. You see, what they were dealing with were a set of Christians who basically asserted that there was a specific way that you had to live your life or a certain culture that you had to assimilate into prior to or as a prerequisite to becoming a born-again Christian. You see, if you think about it, at this stage in the game, most people across the entire world really just look at Christianity as this offshoot of Judaism. And so it kind of makes some sense that you had a lot of people who had those Jewish thoughts or Jewish traditions and said, well, if you're going to be a follower of Christ, you must first become a Jew and then you can become a Christian. What Paul was writing this church in Galatia was a message telling them that that's not what it's all about. And in fact, when you withhold the gift of grace from people under the auspices that they have to first assimilate into your ethnic or your cultural tradition, then you're actually doing something kind of nefarious. You know, you're trying to almost hold something back that Christ himself doesn't even hold back. Christ sacrificed himself for all people. He died on the cross for all individuals so that all sin would be saved across all time and all generations. So if that's the case, then who are we to hold back that blessing from anybody else? This is what we're going to see throughout Galatians. And so as you read through this epistle, I want you to keep that context in mind. There's going to be a lot of discussion of things that kind of tie into these Jewish practices, things like temple worship and things like sacrifices and other cultural practices. Just understand as you go through, especially if some of it seems a little foreign, that all of these things are tying back to the same theme. It's not about being a part of a certain religious tradition or culture that makes you saved. It is the blood of Christ himself, and that's it. So, how can we apply this to our lives today? Well, there's a pretty obvious parallel when you look at how so many Christians today act. I mean, don't many churches out there basically say that unless you assimilate into our faith tradition, then you can't really participate in the blessings of Christ? There are individuals who absolutely, even if it's not like in their doctrine, will make you feel unwelcome if you don't assimilate into their culture or maybe their worship traditions. This is the same type of behavior that we see called out in Galatians, even though it's not based on Jewish traditions. This is the biggest thing that we can take away from our own reading of Galatians today. Is that even though we may not struggle with the exact same types of bars and obstacles that got in the way of the early Christians that were in Galatia, we too struggle with individuals who insist that we have to adopt a certain way of life or a certain tradition or a certain culture in order to be saved. That's not to say that you can live your life in any way, shape, or form that you please with wanton disregard for what is sinful, but it is saying that the constructs of man are not the thing that should be your obstacle. The only obstacles that we actually care about are those things which keep us from having a relationship with Jesus Christ and being a reflection of Christ's character to the outside world. Everything else is just an accessory. So, let's see what God is able to speak to us as we read through Galatians. I hope you're able to get something out of it, and I will enjoy reading through this with you. So, enjoy reading through Galatians, and we'll talk on the back end of this.